of this event for having invited me here, and also Mr. Biju from the US Consulate. Great to have this opportunity. I have to say I both agree and disagree with Dr. Abraham's analysis. The part where I agree is where he started off by saying there is discontent in the US, and it is true. Some of you may have read this book, The Winter of Our Discontent, by John Steinbeck a number of years ago. It talks about how there is an entire generation of people who are disappointed with the way things went in the US. But, bringing that to the current situation, there are many people in the US who feel that the country's standing in the world has diminished, and it is true. 20 years ago or 50 years ago, if you look at the way America was perceived around the world, it was a sole hyperpower. It could do anything it wanted, and Americans sort of bestrode the world like colossi. And no longer, what America says doesn't work. America's writ doesn't run in a number of places, as Professor Casey also mentioned. The sort of withdrawal, the humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan, and now the morass they've gotten into in the Middle East, etc. These have contributed only partly to this feeling of discontent and disappointment. Most of it has come, most of this discontent has arisen, as has been mentioned by Professor Gopa and Professor Casey as well, has come from domestic reasons or domestic problems. Principally the fact that economics has not really worked out for Americans. It turns out that this is the first generation of Americans who do not believe that their children will be better off than themselves. I reiterate that. The very first generation of Americans who feel that their children's prospects are worse than those of their own or what they have done so far, which is absolutely against the American ethic. America has been known for being a nation of optimists, the can-do attitude. There's no obstacle that you cannot overcome. And it's quite impressive that they have managed, in many cases, to overcome significant obstacles. It goes back all the way to their having arrived at this unexplored continent and then having tamed it over a century or two. So the defining characteristic of Americans has always been that they are the ultimate optimists. We can do. In fact, Obama did latch on to that, talking about hope and whatever, change, etc. But it turns out that that characteristic is now beginning to be eroded. They do not have that optimism to the same level anymore. They're beginning to doubt themselves. Okay? And that is the biggest negative that I think 8 years of Obama rule has brought to the country. Some years ago, you're all too young to remember Ronald Reagan, but when he was running for president, he asked a very significant and pertinent question, which was, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? He asked that question, and I think his opponent was Jimmy Carter, if I remember right, and the answer was no. They were not well off, or as well off as they were. In fact, things had deteriorated. Now, if somebody asked that question, and unfortunately, nobody has. I'm surprised that Trump hasn't asked this question. Are you better off today than you were 8 years ago? And the answer is no. Economically speaking, a large number of Americans have declined. They've moved down the socioeconomic ladder. And it's also become far more unequal. The very wealthy, the top 1%, now own, I forget exactly how many, what percentage, something like 80% of all wealth that is being generated is owned by the top 1%, which means the people at the bottom, and especially the people in the middle classes, these are the guys who go out and vote, right? They're all disappointed by the way the economy has gone. So that is the fundamental issue. Foreign policy is interesting, yeah, there are wars, etc., but what is happening to my pocketbook? Am I going to be, doing better as we go forward? That's one. The second is this whole specter of terrorism. I lived in the US for 20 years. There was not, so far as I can remember, more than 2 or 3 terrorism incidents in those 20 years. Now, every day there is a terrorism incident. Okay? This is, again, damaging the American perception of themselves, because they've always viewed themselves as Fortress America, because they're separated by huge water bodies from the rest of the world, right? So nothing can come there and hurt them. But the fact is, there are people who are there. Just yesterday there was another blast. A couple of days ago there was a man running around in a shopping mall, stabbing people. All this is something that Americans are taking to heart as an indication of both their insecurity as well as the fecklessness, if you will, of the Democrats over the last 8 years. So the fact of the matter generally is that young people like yourselves are always liberal, right? You tend to be sort of left-wing because you believe in a number of idealistic perspectives. And I was like that too. Believe it or not, I was also a young person once. And then I used to be, very positive towards the left wing in the US. Many of you have heard of the Green Party, right? Very left-wing, very environmentally conscious and so forth. That is the only party that I've ever been a member of. I was a proud member of the California Green Party. And unfortunately, over time, I've moved away from all that. And now I've become a Republican supporter. 4 years ago, when we had the last election, I was the director of the Asian School of Business in Trivandrum. And thanks to the US Consulate in Biju and other people from there, we had a mock election in ASB. And I was quite entertained by the results. Who do you think won in our mock election? Any thoughts? We actually had a voting booth. People could vote for Obama or Mitt Romney. Who do you think won? Any thoughts? By a landslide, like 99% of the votes or something. And Biju had brought some, decals or buttons. Some Republican and some Democrat. I was the only Republican badge-wearing person. So I'm pretty sure that you guys, if we repeat this exercise here, will all be Democrats voting for Hillary. But I'm telling you, over time, as you grow older, you will probably change your mind. And that's exactly what happened to me. I used to read the New York Times and I used to believe everything they said. And over time, I started getting a little bit more positive towards the Wall Street Journal, partly because the Wall Street Journal, even though it's conservative and they have some pretty nasty perspectives on occasion, they are very focused on the economy. And from that point of view, I find, also because I'm in the business world, I teach at business school, I find that their policies are more sensible, and that change that I went through seems to have happened quite a bit in the US in general. And it's not just older people like me, but young people too. You all are familiar with what happened with Bernie Sanders, right? I mean, he is probably the most unlikely presidential candidate you can imagine. The guy's old, right? He's like, I don't know, 80 or something. He's very old. Secondly, he's almost a communist. He's a socialist, unheard of in the US. And he's from this remote corner of the US. I think it's New Hampshire or Maine or something. Vermont, thank you. Vermont is like a tiny little place. And he was always sort of a gadfly, somebody who was, irritating the establishment. Nobody took him seriously. The fact that he almost defeated Hillary, he almost did. And Hillary had to resort to, maybe I shouldn't say Hillary, but the Democratic Party had to resort to some underhanded tactics. WikiLeaks has demonstrated how the Democratic National Committee actively sabotaged Bernie's candidacy in many ways. What this shows is a certain level of desperation, right? And also a certain level of lack of charisma on the part of Hillary. If you look just on paper, Hillary should have walked away with the Democratic nomination, right? I mean, she has all the credentials. She was former First Lady. She was Secretary of State, blah, blah, blah. And on paper, she should have won. Similarly, on paper, Jeb Bush should have won the Republican nomination because he was the son and brother of two former presidents, and he had that name brand associated with him, but he didn't win. Why? It's because there is a huge amount of anti-establishment feeling there. I think Professor Gopa mentioned this as well. There's a tsunami of anti-establishment feeling, and that's directed at what I call the deep state. The deep state is what Noam Chomsky a few years ago called the military-industrial complex, except it's grown now. Not only the military and the industrial people, but also media, the church, academia, a whole bunch of elite institutions that now constitute the deep state. And what's interesting is that the deep state's interests don't seem to be coinciding with the interests of the US. The deep state's interests tend to be about self-preservation. And this has become the locus of a lot of discussion. Why is the deep state doing certain things? And Hillary is the ultimate deep state person. She's totally establishment, and that has been one of the biggest problems that she's run into. There's another point I wanted to make about that, which is it's not only in the US, but there are other places in the world where the establishment is viewed negatively and people are voting against it. One example is Brexit in the in the UK. As you know, Britain left the European Union, and that was also considered almost impossible. Nobody thought Britain would leave. But what happened there is the common man and woman on the street, they were so pissed off by the establishment, the elites who were telling them, the establishment was telling them how to vote, and so they voted against them. So that kind of anti-establishment feeling is now a major factor that is hurting Hillary Clinton. I also read a very interesting short piece written by a gentleman named Nicholas Nassim Taleb. Have any of you heard of Taleb? He wrote a book called The Black Swan, a fantastic book. All of you should read it. So he is a statistician and economist and a very interesting person. So he said, it's not only the political elite that have let down the people. He said there are a number of other elites. One example, the medical elite in the US has made a U-turn on cholesterol, right? For the last 30 years, they were saying cholesterol is bad, so fat is bad, etc. Last year, they quietly said, no, cholesterol is not that bad. What are you supposed to think? Okay? How do you believe these guys? Today, they say sugar is bad. Maybe tomorrow, they'll say, you know, sugar is not so bad. Salt is bad, right? That was one example. Another example was the 2008 financial meltdown. Once again, the elites, these investment bankers and so forth, who were so wealthy and so powerful, they were the ones who let down the rest of the country and ended up costing the US government, that is the US taxpayer, many billions of dollars. A third example that Taleb quotes is that of scientific papers. I was shocked to hear this. Apparently, only about 36% of scientific papers that are published in peer-reviewed journals, which one would believe are the most well-reviewed papers, only 36% can be reproduced, which is to say they're lying. All these people who are publishing papers in journals, scientific papers, they're lying because their results cannot be reproduced. So I'm just pointing this out to show you that there is a general backlash against authority figures, and that's really what Clinton has run into here. In fact, this backlash is so powerful that her gender card, is not working either, right? Because everybody had thought, Obama is the first black president, therefore he's overcome that handicap, and the race card was something that he used successfully. So now there is this sort of plaintive cry, Hillary is a woman, it's time that a woman became president. Unfortunately, many women also don't seem to believe that, okay, because that doesn't seem to be enough to overcome 2 or 3 significant problems that she has. One, the major one. Yeah, I'll just finish in a couple of minutes then. The biggest problem that she faces is the trust issue. People don't believe her, especially recently when she had this health problem, because people have been saying for a long time that she's got brain damage. And the fact that she had pneumonia and she didn't reveal it, that shows that she's somewhat untrustworthy. So to conclude, the thing that we see here is a tremendous antipathy towards Hillary. On the other hand, there are a lot of things that Trump says. I agree. He's kind of a loose-mouthed person. He says all kinds of things. But the fact is that, you know, the US government is like a battleship. It's very difficult to turn a battleship because there are a lot of people in the bureaucracy that are actually taking the operational decisions. So it's not as though some of the wild and crazy things that Trump is talking about will actually happen. This is election rhetoric. It'll take some, you know, he's not going to be able to change things that much. So to conclude, fundamentally, the American public chose an unknown, Obama, in 2000, whenever it was, 8, right? So 8, yeah. They chose an unknown. Now, Trump is another unknown. If you can choose one unknown, why not choose another? It's a different matter that Obama has been a disappointment. Nevertheless, my belief is that this time, if you look at the polls and the momentum is with Trump, and I believe he's the one who's going to win. Thank you.